In the course of every nation, there arrives a time in men's lives where they face dark times, the dark hour of that nation. And what they do at that time and how they react to that changes the course of history. I can think of many times, even in our own country, where that is true and has been true. But thinking about this, I thought, perhaps because I had learned something about this recently, of Great Britain and the days just prior to World War II. Coming up before the days of World War II, as Germany began to escalate, as they began to build up their arms and showed some signs of looking like they were going to become aggressive toward their neighbors. The Prime Minister at the time, Chamberlain, advised a policy of appeasement, which basically meant just let them do what they want. They're not bad guys. They're not that bad. And let them build up, because a strong Germany means a defense against Russia, and we're kind of concerned about them. And so they were willing to let Hitler get very strong and for Germany to get very strong, and Chamberlain failed to recognize the danger that was coming. He didn't see where things were going. Most of England didn't. Most of Parliament didn't. The one voice that cried in the wilderness was Winston Churchill. And Churchill did recognize and did see clearly where things were going and warned against that. And when he proved to be right and Chamberlain proved to be wrong, as Germany did advance on Poland, Chamberlain found himself no longer the prime minister, and shortly thereafter, Winston Churchill was. And Churchill was a great prime minister during World War II and really did so much to see England through. And England can, credit Churchill for a lot of the fact that they're still around today. There are times in every nation where things can be very dark. And some men see clearly, and some are blind. And it's God who gives the light to see. Take your Bibles and go to 2 Kings, and we're going to look at such a time in the history of Israel. In 2 Kings, did I tell you chapter 6? We're going to read about spiritual vision and blindness. Israel at the time that we're about to read about is in one of those very dark hours. At one time, Israel was a nation of great strength. At its peak, as the United Kingdom under King David, Israel was stronger than every country around. No enemy could stand against them, and after a while, none even dared try. Israel was prosperous, and it had such great wealth during the reign of King David that as it extended, as his reign then was passed on to Solomon, and this time of great strength extended into Solomon's reign, Israel was so rich that kings and queens from all over would come just to behold the glory and riches of Israel. But Solomon didn't stay faithful to walking with God like David did. David was a wonderful king, a man after God's own heart. Last week we read many of the Psalms of David, and we saw the great heart that King David had. That great heart for God and how he loved God with all of his heart. And how he followed and worshiped the one true God and had certainly no other gods before him. and knew that God was his strength. And because he knew God was his strength, he could go into battle with the confidence that God was with him, and nobody could stand against him, and nobody could stand against God's people, Israel. But because Solomon, by the end of his life, although Solomon started off very well, that by the end of his life, he also turned away from the true God. He turned away from the true God and began to follow after other gods, and because of that, during his reign, that kingdom of Israel divided. So then it became a divided kingdom, known as the kingdom of Israel, which comprised 10 of the tribes of Israel, and the kingdom of Judah, which comprised 2 others. And for the rest of the history of Israel until the captivities, they are a divided kingdom. They never reunite. During that time of that divided kingdom, for the most part, both Israel and Judah strayed from God. And Israel even worse than Judah when you look at their history. Judah occasionally had a king that did follow the true God. Israel practically never did. And God sent prophets to call them back. Prophets, great prophets like Elijah. And when Elijah came along, Israel was in a very, very dark place. The king at the time was a king by the name of Ahaz, and he was a terrible king who led them to idolatry and worshipped all kinds of different gods. And he was married to a wife by the name of Jezebel. You Jezebel, you may have heard that. That's not a name, if anybody you know is just going through a book of Bible names looking for one they'd like to name their daughter, and they think that sounds pretty, tell them don't. Because Jezebel was horrible. She was a horrible queen who put to death the prophets of God. And because of these kings being so wicked and idolatrous, Israel as a country was no longer that strong nation it once was. It was plagued by the neighbors around them, who were constantly warring against them, who were constantly threatening to overtake them, to overcome them. Israel was in the midst of the Assyrian Empire. They were surrounded by the Assyrian Empire, and that was the strongest and greatest empire of the day. That Assyrian Empire was known by many different names, but the overall was the Assyrians. And after Elijah stood against Ahaz and Jezebel and the prophets of Baal that they had set up, he got to the point one day, after a long time of fighting against them, where he just felt tired. He just felt like he couldn't go on any longer. He couldn't fight any longer. And he was ready to just call it quits. And God talked to him, and God said, well, you deserve a rest. I'll give you that. But before you do, you need to go and train someone to take the job from you. And so God led him to a man named Elisha. Elisha. And Elisha was a wonderful man of God also, another one of the wonderful prophets. And that's what we're going to be looking at in chapter 6. Elisha, from the time that Elijah found him and ordained him till the time he died, he stood for God and spoke God's word in the face of great opposition and risked his life time and again to do so. Elijah stood and spoke God's word for over 50 years. Over 50 years through the reign of 6 different kings.
Wow.
Kings came and went. Elijah was still there. And we pick up the record here with Elisha at a time where All of the wrongdoing, all of the wickedness that Israel had committed has really caught up with them, and they find themselves in a bad place. And we'll read about that in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 8. Then the king of Syria warred against Israel. Syria was directly to the north of Israel. This divided kingdom, for those of you that can see it, I'll show you it on the map here. This divided kingdom is shown on this map, and you may not be able to see the big letters of Judah. Judah is this southern kingdom, okay? So it's only two, but they still got a lot of land there, don't they? And Israel is the northern kingdom up here. Up here is Syria, okay? Also known as Aram. Those people are also referred to as the Arameans. And they spoke the language of Aramaic. There we go. Syria was part of that Assyrian, see that word in there? Syria, Assyrian Empire. So that king of Syria warred against Israel, verse 8, and took counsel with his servants, saying, in such and such a place shall be my camp. We're going to go set up camp in such and such a place. And the man of God sent unto the king of Israel. The man of God is Elisha. The king of Israel is Jehoram. Jehoram. Now, when you're tracing these kings of this divided kingdom, boy, that's not an easy thing to do. Because many of these kings have the same names. You'll have a son who has the same name as his father. You'll have a king of Judah who has the same name as a king of Israel. And in this particular case, that really gets tricky because there is a Jehoram of Israel who is reigning at one point at the same time has Jehoram of Judah. So that's tough to follow. But this is Jehoram of Israel that we're talking about. And the man of God sent unto this king, Jehoram, saying, beware that thou pass not such a place, for thither the Syrians are come down. So whenever the king say, we're going to go set up camp here, Elisha would tell the king, Jehoram, hey, stay away from there, because that whole army of the Syrians, they're hanging out there. And the king of Israel sent to the place which the man of God told him and warned him of, and saved himself there, not once nor twice. In other words, and again this would happen. Again and again, Elisha would say, hey, stay away from that place. They're setting up camp there. And then he'd stay away. And then they'd move their camp. And sure enough, Elisha would say, hey, don't go over to Syracuse. They're camping out there. Okay, they'd stay away from Syracuse. The king said, well, I better move. They're not coming here. We'll set up camp in Israel. And then Elisha would warn the king and say, stay away from Ithaca, because that's where they're going now. Therefore, verse 11, the heart of the king of Syria, the bad guy, right, the king of Syria, was sore troubled for this thing. And he called his servants and said unto them, will you not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? We got a spy in our midst. We got a mole, because somebody, every time we set up camp, is tipping off the king of Israel where we are. Who is it? Figure out who the spy is, because somebody's warning the king that where we're going. Verse 12, and one of his servants said, none, my lord, O king. No, we don't. There's no spy in our midst. None of us is for the king of Israel. But Elisha, the prophet that is in Israel, telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. Isn't that great? The words you say in your bedchamber, when you got the doors closed, and just you and you're whispering and nobody else can even hear. That prophet, he's telling the king of Israel what's going on. He's telling them everything you're doing, everything you're saying. How could Elisha know what he was whispering in his bedchamber? Revelation. That's right. Because God told Elisha what was going on, and Elisha warned the king. Verse 13. And he said, go and spy where he is, that I may send and fetch him. And it was told him, saying, behold, he's in Dothan. I want to get that prophet. Where is he? And they said, well, he's in Dothan. Therefore sent he, king of Syria, sent thither horses and chariots and a great host. That means a whole army. He's got a whole army with horses and chariots, the cavalry. And horses and chariots, that was the strength of a kingdom. All the power, all the might, everything he had to throw at him, he threw at him. And why did he send a whole army after Elisha? Because he knew earlier some other guy was mad at Elisha and sent 50 guys to go get him, and that was the last they ever heard of any of them. So he wasn't going to mess around. He sent a whole army after them. Verse 15. They compassed the city about. Verse 15. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, a host, the whole army, compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And his servants said unto him, alas, my master, how shall we do? Suppose you looked out your window. Suppose you went out in the morning, and you looked out and saw an entire army was there just for you. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid couldn't fight their way out of that one. A whole army after him. You can't blame the guy for being freaked out, could you? Because what he saw were overwhelming odds. Something too big, too great for them to ever be able to withstand. That's what he saw with his physical eyes. But there was something that he didn't see that Elisha did see. Verse 16. And he, Elisha, answered, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. Elisha said, hey, don't worry. See all of that army? Well, we've got more with us than they've got with them. Boy, to the five senses, that just seemed like nonsense. And Elisha prayed, verse 17, and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. Open the eyes of the servant so he can see really what's going on. If you are limited to just your five senses, you'll never really see what's going on in life. Because there's something greater than just the five senses realm. There's something greater than just the physical realm. There is a spiritual realm. And that's bigger than the natural realm. And it's what really controls the forces that are at work in the natural realm. And Elijah prayed that God would open his servant's eyes so that he could see spiritually what was going on. And the Lord opened the eyes, continuing in verse 17, of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. They've got an army, but all the mountains around them are filled with horses and chariots of fire. Not just chariots, but chariots of fire. Now, that's the strength of God that they had. That's the power of God that they had. Those horses and chariots of fire don't come running down and fight the guys. That's not how it goes down. But that's the power that was represented there. And you see what does happen. And when they came down to him, verse 18, Elisha prayed unto the Lord and said, smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. And he smote them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. The servant saw with his spiritual eyes that whole army. And then after Elisha prayed, knowing the power of God that he had, that whole army couldn't see anything with their physical eyes. The servant of the Lord's spiritual eyes were open, and the army, their physical eyes were closed. They were blind as a bat. They couldn't see the hand in front of their face. 19. And Elijah, boy, and you just, these prophets, you got to admire not only their braveness, but their sense of humor in some of these situations, okay? And Elijah said unto them, this is not the way, neither is this the city. Hey, you guys are in the wrong place. This isn't where you're supposed to be. This isn't the right way. You didn't come the right way. This isn't the city you're supposed to be in. Follow me, and I'll bring you to the man whom you seek. I'll show you who you're looking for. Just follow me, guys. But he led them to Samaria. Samaria is the capital of Israel now. Okay? That's the capital city. Israel's changed capitals a couple of times since it first divided, and at this point, Samaria is the capital. And so he brings them right to Samaria, the capital city of Israel. Brings them right to the king of Israel, right to his doorstep. A bunch of blind guys. Verse 20. And it came to pass when they were come into Samaria that Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men that they may see. Let them see where they are. So there they are, and there's the whole army of Israel with, a welcoming committee for them. Let them see where they're really at now. And the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. And the king of Israel said unto Elisha when he saw them, My father, shall I smite them? Shall I smite them? Can I get them? Can I kill them? That's what the king of Israel said. Elijah, can I get them? You brought them to me? Let me get them. Let me kill them. And he answered, verse 22, Thou shalt not smite them. Don't kill them. Wilt thou smite those whom thou hast taken captive with thy sword and with thy bow? If you capture an enemy, is that what you do once you got them captured? Once they say, I surrender, do you shoot them then? Is that what you do? No. Set bread and water before them that they may eat and drink and go to their master. Feed them and send them home. Let them go back and report what's happening here in Israel, what you're really up against. Let them know that there's a God in Israel and a man who walks with them. Let them know that the power of God is greater than anything they can throw at us. So they go home. And he prepared great provision for them, and when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them their way, and they went to their master. So the bands of Syria came no more into the land of Israel. They left him alone for a good long time, but not forever. Not forever. Verse 24. And it came to pass after this, and there is time. There's time. This isn't like the next day. This is many years later. The Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, we got another king here, gathered all his host and went up and besieged Samaria. To besiege a city is you've got it all cut off from anybody being able to go in or go out. They're all separated. You surround the city. It's besieged. You lay siege to it. Doesn't mean you've defeated them. You've just got them all cut off from anybody else. Verse 25. And there was a great famine in Samaria, and behold, they besieged it, until an ass's head was sold for 80 pieces of silver, and the fourth part of a cab of dove's dung for 5 pieces of silver. And you're probably wondering, if you don't know what that's all about, why would anybody want to eat an ass's head and certainly a little bit of some dove's dung? But it's not what it seems. There's an Orientalism, an Eastern idiom there. This is from Bishop Casey Pillai's Eastern Customs and Idioms of the Bible. There are certain despised foods in the East, which include ass's head, dove's dung, barley cakes, and wild figs. Ass's head is a kind of root, which grows in the hedges. This is not ass's head at all, no more so than a hot dog is a dog. This is eaten during the famine time. When there is no famine, it's eaten by the pigs. The famine was so acute in Samaria that they sold asses' heads, this root, for so much, and so was dove's dung. Dove's dung is really a type of pea or bean which they feed the doves. Got it? So, a root in some kind of pea or bean. Well, we'll keep reading. What verse was I in? Verse 26. And as the king of Israel was passing by upon the wall, there cried a woman unto him, saying, Help, my lord, O king. So they've got this terrible, terrible famine, where the smallest thing that nobody ever would even eat is selling for a huge price. So this woman cries to the king. And he said, If the Lord do not help thee, when shall I help thee? How can I help you? The Lord won't even help us. We're all messed up. We're up the creek without a paddle. What can I do for you? Out of the barn floor, out of the wine press, you think I got all kinds of food in store here? And the king said unto her, What aileth thee? What's your problem? And she answered, she tells him this whole story about how this woman said unto her, Give me your son that we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat my kid. Yeah. And so she does it. She tells the story. I gave him my kid, and we boiled him up and ate him. Can you imagine? No. And then, when it was her turn, she held out. She wouldn't give me her kid to eat. Yeah. I don't know how desperate you got to be for that one. I suppose you got to be more than just desperate. But that's what was going on there. You talk about a dark hour, you don't get any darker than that, do you? And it came to pass when the king heard the words of the woman that he rent his clothes in great despair, passed upon the wall, and people saw that he had sackcloth on his flesh. Verse 31. Then he said, God do so and more also to me if the head of Elisha the son of Shaphat shall stand on him this day. He's mad at Elisha. He's blaming Elisha for this. Why is he blaming Elijah? Elisha's helped him in the past. We saw that, right? He knows Elijah walks with God. But Elijah's been telling them that if they don't quit worshiping other gods, that God's not going to be able to help them, and a famine is going to happen. In fact, he warned people ahead of time. In fact, God had Elisha go to that woman, that widow woman, whose son, if you know the record, he restored. You can read this in chapter 28, and warned her about the coming famine and told her to leave until things ended. But nonetheless, they're blaming Elisha. And he says he's going to have his head. The king of Israel says he's going to have Elisha's head. Verse 32, But Elijah sat in his house, and the elders sat with him. And the king sent a man before him, but before the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, See how this son of a murderer hath sent to take away mine head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and lock him out. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him? He said, This son of a murderer, referring to the king of Israel. And you know why he was the son of a murderer? Because you know whose son Jehoram was? He was the son of Ahaz and Jezebel, those that had murdered all the prophets of God. See how this son of a murderer, he's the same way as Ahaz and Jezebel. They killed all the prophets, and now he wants to kill me? Well, he's not gonna. And while he yet talked with them, behold, the messenger came down unto him and said, Behold, this is evil of the Lord. What should I wait for the Lord any longer? Then Elijah said, chapter 7, Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, Tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. Then a Lord on whose the hand of the king leaned answered the man of God and said, Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be? He said, Boy, what do you think? Food's going to pour out of heaven? If it did, it still wouldn't be the case. But we'll see what really happens next time.